So we're here to, first of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Christine Sullivan. I work for the Connecticut Small Business Development Center. I have been part of HAYVN from the very beginning, and am really looking forward to meeting with you and hearing more about your businesses. We are, so for my 1-minute commercial, I work with a group of 20 consultants throughout the state of Connecticut to help people start and grow small businesses in a healthy way. We are paid for by the state, so we are free to work with you. And if any of the things in this conversation or other things that you could use to help your business grow, please, my contact information will be at the end. But ever since COVID started, we've been hearing this word pivot. And we created this presentation because our organization has so many clients and everybody kept coming with the same question. I think I should pivot. I don't know what that means. So we sort of dug into it, studied it a little bit, and came up with this, this agenda, which is helping people develop a healthy pivot plan, helping them understand really what that means. Like, how do you know if you're pivoting in the right direction or the wrong direction? Something that we talked about earlier, creating a crisis management team, and maybe I phrase that a little bit differently now. I think it's creating the right support staff sort of around you and your businesses so that when you are needing to make a pivot or make a change, you have the support that you need. And then underlying the entire conversation is your financial health. So making sure that you actually understand where you are, which will help you understand what is, what your options really are. So we're going to cover this. Let's see, here we go. And first of all, the reason everybody's talking about a pivot is because nobody plans for a pandemic. I am a financial person. I was an investment banker for close to 20 years. I am really fluent with thinking through financial statements and seeing things through that lens and planning. But the pandemic is like the experience that we've all been through in the last year is nothing that a business plan would have even contemplated. So if you're feeling a little confused or tossed up in the air about your business, or everything was on fire, or everything wasn't on fire, like that's what we've been through. And the other model that we laugh about is, and I'm dating myself, but watching Monty Python movies when I was in high school, that nobody ever expects the Spanish Inquisition. So what is a pivot then? And this is probably the best definition that I found when we were doing our research. And it's something that I would hang on to, is a pivot's a change in strategy without a change in vision. So what strategies can you employ that are going to work better today without changing, the vision for your company? Like when I think of what I've seen that Felicia's done since this pandemic has happened, it's not that she decided she should be delivering sushi takeout for people at home. That's a change in vision. But what she did do is bring a lot of her product offerings online. So delivering the same content, same vision, but a slightly different strategy. So thinking about, and I'm going to get into this a little bit later, but what are we really good at? How has the market changed, and how can we bridge that gap? And in terms of pivots, there are some really famous pivots and some great pivot stories over the last year. And that YouTube, nobody even knows this, actually started as a dating site, and it didn't work as that, but the video component took off. So here we are. I'm going to walk through some of the pivot stories and use these a little bit as inspiration of the kind of things that we've seen over the course of the last year. So starting at the top with what we call like a mini pivot is restaurants focusing on takeout. It's a great example. It's, it's what people wanted to do. It addressed the challenges of COVID. Similarly, grocery stores offering curbside pickup. Like, this is not a giant leap. It may have required them to do some different marketing messaging, a little bit operational change here and there, but ultimately they're selling what they used to sell, doing it in a slightly different way. The middle category, the market expanding pivot. So this could be, these are things that we also saw, is restaurant suppliers selling bulk to customers. I mean, my sister has been making rice and black beans for the last year and is only like a third of the way through the giant bags that she ended up buying, but it made sense at the time, and took advantage of that. Hotel rooms, which, really there are no hotels that have been doing well throughout 2020, but they've been really struggling to find a relevance. And one of the things that we've seen offered is co-working. Fitness companies moving workouts online, again, like expands their market, because once COVID is over, there's really no reason that if you have a great, great yoga instructor who lives across the country from you, you can still use them, even post-COVID. Then we've got like what we call the big inspirational pivots. And the one that I didn't put on that I read about is there's a strip club out in Portland, Oregon, that obviously was going to have to close down, and they didn't want to close forever. And what they ended up using is their dancing ladies ended up doing delivery, and they sold more hamburgers doing, takeout than they ever have before. And they were able to survive the pandemic and create jobs for people who wouldn't have had it. So interesting. But closer to home, one of my clients who's here locally was a chiropractor who had, a typical office building type of environment that closed. So she bought a van, and she's got this like tricked out Mercedes Sprinter van. She'll do driveway sessions. She'll come to your office building and meet people. It's super clean, modern, and she's been doing really well. And then one of the more fun ones is, my family is super into wine tasting, and I spent a lot of time living in San Francisco. And we would usually do a trip for my dad's birthday. We ended up doing it online, and it was super fun. There was somebody at the vineyard. They shipped us each half bottles of 5 different wines. I mean, so that, again, it's a big inspirational pivot. I think they're going to continue to do that even when you can go to the vineyard. So then why is it so hard to pivot? Why do people struggle so much? And I think it is what we've come up with is sort of these 2 thoughts, is that we really do get anchored by what we know and what we've always done. And that limits our sort of whiteboard capabilities or brainstorming, because usually small businesses have limited staff. And if they're successful, it's because they've really sort of nailed it operationally, what has to get done from a marketing perspective, what needs to get done. And when you throw things in the air like COVID's done, how do we think through where it should land? We don't really have those skills, and it's hard to not, in a moment of crisis or stress, to not rely on something comfortable. And a pivot is inherently asking you to try and do something a little uncomfortable. And you take that feeling and extrapolate it to how teams work. You've got a small business, you've got a team working with you. They're not really constructed to pivot as well. They are people who over time have been successful by figuring out how to work there and execute the business plan that you have them working on. And they're just not designed to be sort of throwing the business plan in the air and taking that risk of where it lands. So how do we figure out a way around this? And this, there's a great article that was written that I found that said, instead of asking, how do I get my business back to where it was? You ask yourself, if I was starting my business today, knowing what I know now, what business would I start? And, this reminds me of a book that my dad gave me, I think like in the 80s. I think I was like in college, and it was called Who Moved My Cheese? And it's kind of a hysterical book about like a mouse, and they keep moving his cheese. And the analogy is to people in a work environment where things keep changing, and how long does it take you to address that things have changed? So this is something sort of anchored into my, in terms of, if I'm trying to accomplish the same things in the end, but certain things around the edges have changed, how should I be delivering the content, the consulting, the advisory work that I do now? And we have a 3-part plan in terms of how to pivot. And this is for somebody who thinks they should pivot. The business is a little off, not really sure about how to do it, and is really not feeling all the brainstorming that they might like to be feeling, or that maybe they were feeling when they started their business. And sort of 3 parts here: a SWOT analysis to start with, just to ground you on where you are, adding a crisis rescue team, which really, in a non-crisis environment, I would take this as like a really strong, diverse advisory board, and then make sure that you're using all available resources. So back to basics, I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. It's Business School 101. A SWOT analysis looks at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. The rubric that's on the slide here, I think, is helpful. Sometimes people print it out in a way where you can just scribble. And, this is one of the things that my own technique is to sort of print it out. You can make it on a piece of paper or a napkin and then carry it around with you. And as things occur to you, write them down. The top half of this is really looking internally at my own business. What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? What are the strengths? What are the things that I'm really good at, better than anybody else? What do we do best? What do our customers love about us? And then what do we worry about? What keeps me up at night in terms of the weaknesses? What should I be working on to do better? What do my customers really need that I can't deliver? Looking at the bottom half of the chart, this is really looking externally, how we compete, how we play in our market. So for opportunities, what industry strengths or what industry trends play best to our strengths. So for we've seen some local pizza places that really never had much of a sit down area in the restaurant, but relied a lot on takeout. They've all flourished as a result of COVID. And the restaurants that had big sit down but never thought about takeout, or really didn't have food that was conducive to a takeout, like a fondue, really not had an easy time. And looking to your threats, what industry trends are not in our favor, and what are our competitors doing better than we are? So it's always good to it's always good to know who your competitors are. Even as specific a business as you may have, and you may not think you have many competitors, you do. And then what industry trends aren't in our favor? I wonder what it would take to get me to go to a movie theater again after what has happened in the last year. So we've heard a lot of them have gone out of business and they're sort of rethinking. So in terms of knowing your customer, this is another way to sort of anchor your feelings about who you're selling to in the midst of looking through your SWOT analysis. And I think that this is a nice way to sort of take any assumptions off the table, just go to the basics here: demographics, who are they, age, gender, education. Looking at the cognitive lens, what ideas and opinions and assumptions do your customers have? What are their feelings? Why do they come to you? What are their concerns, needs? And then future plans. If you have a set of customers, like, how is that going to grow into the future, given their own plans and when they'll reach out to you? So in terms of brainstorming, this is another sort of another rubric to think about. If you're having trouble filling up that whiteboard with new thoughts, ask your question, why and what next for each of these. Your business concept, is that still valid? Would you still start this business today? Your organizational structure, is it still valid? Is this how you would structure it today? Your customer relation lens, same thing. And then your operations, is this how we would set it up today? It's important to know your personal limits, particularly in a crisis. This is something we can talk about. It'll help you be super honest about what you can do, what you can't do, if you're able, if you find yourself in a stressful situation like we all have in the past year, to understand this a little better. And this is something that I think is important. It's important during stress, but now that we're through the most of what we think COVID's going to bring, knock on wood, we call it a crisis rescue team, is putting as diverse a group of personalities and skill sets sitting around the table as you can. In good times, we call this having an advisory board. And Felicia, I'm going to use you as an example here, because when I was working with Felicia before she started HAYVN, I was primarily working on her financial model. Like, I was the Excel person, and she spent time with me almost every week. And I would give her something to think about. She'd give me something to think about. We would come and sit down and model it out. And I didn't realize until HAYVN was almost open that she actually had like 7 more people who were doing this with her on different aspects of what HAYVN was going to be. And I really think that that was a big part of her success. The people that can be helpful to you in a crisis or in regular times when you're just trying to make sure you're making sound decisions are who are the decision makers at your company, depending on how big or small. Who are your best employees? Because you can get the number of ideas that come internally is endless. Your customers, your creditors, any specialists like your accountants or lawyers, and then of course the people in your lives who have, been on this journey with you, and give them all a seat at the table and ask them all the hard questions and see what comes back. Now, in terms of assessing your financial health, this is key to understanding how you're going to be able to withstand a pivot. And here are just some key questions to have answered. I think as a best practice, these are things that I think companies should be looking at quarterly anyway, but maybe more frequently in times of stress. But what's your cash situation like? How many months of expenses can you manage? What debt do you have that you have to manage or think about or renegotiate? What kind of payments in are you expecting? And what's the long-term look for your business given how your clients are reacting now? The next two slides are cash flow budgeting tools that happy to share with you. They're a little dull to go through, but it's sort of a worksheet matrix that helps you line up money coming in versus money coming out. And then to the extent that it's financial stress that you're feeling, here are some ways to think through what that would look like. In terms of selling assets, collecting receivables, stretching out your payables, all things that people think about in terms of crisis. So with that, this is my team. We're all here to help. I think that one of the things that we've been used for quite a bit in the last year is being one of the people at the table, helping people make their pivot decisions. We've got a lot of market research. We're whizzes on Excel, and we have a lot of tools that we can help you with. So with that, my contact information is on the screen, but I will then stop sharing so I can see more faces and see if there are any questions.